In a dramatic turn shaking the Middle East, Israel's war in Iran has escalated, drawing in the United States and setting off alarms from Beijing to Berlin. Following surprise Israeli raids on Iranian nuclear sites, the US joined in with stealth airstrikes, leaving Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan in flames. Iran vowed vengeance. Now missiles are flying in all directions from Tehran to Tel Aviv, and a new chapter in the region's long, bloody history may be underway. Over 400 Iranians are killed, dozens of dead in Israel, and Gaza is still bleeding. As leaders speak of diplomacy, the world teeters on the edge of broader war. Tonight, we'll break down the strategy, the stakes, and the shockwaves in this All 24 News special. Hello there and welcome to tonight's special on All 24 News. I'm Karim Zachary and here is the latest. Tensions in the Middle East have reached a critical point. In a stunning escalation, the United States launched direct strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, triggering an immediate missile retaliation from Tehran. Here's more with Yasin Rikti on what's quickly becoming one of the region's most dangerous flashpoints.
In a dramatic escalation, the United States launched surprise airstrikes on three major Iranian nuclear facilities early Sunday, prompting an immediate missile response from Tehran and igniting fears of wider regional conflict. The targeted sites, Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan, were struck by B-2 stealth bombers, according to the Pentagon. US President Donald Trump claimed the operation had completely destroyed Iran's nuclear infrastructure, calling it a tremendous success on his Truth Social platform. He declared, "Fordo is gone."
The strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
US officials said the mission was kept secret, with only a few top Washington figures aware beforehand. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane confirmed the bombers exited Iranian airspace undetected. Tehran, however, downplayed the damage. Iranian officials said all nuclear sites had been evacuated prior to the attack, and enriched uranium was relocated. The Iranian Red Crescent reported no casualties, and the IAEA confirmed no increase in radiation levels. Hours later, Iran launched Operation True Promise 3, firing long-range missiles at several Israeli targets, including Ben Gurion Airport, military bases and research centers. For the first time, Iran used its new Kaber ballistic missile, capable of carrying multiple warheads. In another development, the Iranian parliament also approved a motion to close the Strait of Hormuz, pending final clearance from the Supreme National Security Council. Officials further threatened to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. President Masoud Pezeshkian accused the US of stepping in militarily after Israel failed to achieve its objectives. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, speaking at an OIC meeting in Istanbul, warned of permanent consequences, declaring Iran would respond by all necessary means.
The Islamic Republic of Iran continue to defend Iran's territory, sovereignty, security, and people by all means necessary against not just US military aggression, but also the reckless and unlawful actions of the Israeli regime.
Meanwhile, UN Security Council held an emergency meeting led by Russia, China and Pakistan, who are proposing an immediate unconditional ceasefire. The situation in the Middle East is rapidly deteriorating, mainly after US latest attacks on Iran, posing an imminent risk of full-scale confrontation over the region.
All right, let's begin our debate for tonight. Joining us tonight is Dr. Tahir Ahmed, International Relations Lecturer from Rawalpindi, Pakistan. Thank you, sir, for agreeing to be with us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Our pleasure. And from the UK is Dr. Yvonne Ridley, former royal correspondent and human rights advocate, as well as an author from Scotland, to be precise. Hello there, ma'am. How are you doing?
Good evening. Very well, thank you.
Our pleasure to have you with us, as always. And last but not least, we have the privilege as well to welcome Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi, geopolitical analyst and MENA and Maghreb affairs expert from Paris, France. Hello there, sir. Thank you for agreeing to be with us tonight.
Good evening, Karima. Thank you for having me on the show, and my special greetings to your respected guest.
Thank you so much. So let's just try and put this into perspective, beginning from scratch. Dr. Tahir Ahmed, what strategic logic drove Israel's decision to strike in the first place? I mean, we've all seen that video compilation of the entity's Prime Minister Netanyahu warning that Iran is having nuclear weapon produced within months or even weeks. And the date goes back to as far as 30 years ago, that is 1992. So why now?
If we look at the situation, this time Iran was engaged in negotiations on the nuclear program. And secondly, there was a giant comprehensive plan of action in 2015, which was to be renegotiated. So given that fact involving Iran in the negotiation process gives it a legitimacy and a way forward to reintegration into the global stage or economic stage. At this time, the Israelis engaged in Gaza genocide, and it has to deflect its attention toward another front, and then sabotaging the peace process between the US and Iran, which was going to happen in Oman, so that Iran may not get their legitimacy, plus it can deflect the attention of the world opinion from Gaza to something else. And the strategic objective of this appears this time is that it has been weakening the proxies of Iran one by one, and then it started directly engaging the gravity of force of the proxies that were fighting Israel after October attack. So that is how appears for me. That is to sabotage the peace process. Secondly, Israel wants to maintain nuclear monopoly in the Middle East. So engaging or giving it the de jure status after a treaty or negotiation with the US keep the balance of power between the two rivals, and they would not be welcomed by Israel. So this was the opportunity that the meeting had to take on 15th, whereas the attack of Israel took place on 13th. So just days before, challenging on setting a setback to the negotiation efforts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. Let's bring in Dr. Yvonne Ridley. Yvonne, was this merely about Iran's nuclear facilities, or there's something more there?
Well, Israel has for many, many years complained about Iran's nuclear facilities and or nuclear capabilities. And I was just looking through the records, and back in 1996, Benjamin Netanyahu was saying that Iran was getting extremely close to developing nuclear weapons. Then he repeated the same again in 2012, saying that they could be a few weeks away from developing their first bomb. And then in 2015, he said that Iran was within touching distance of having an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs. Netanyahu has been fixating on Iran's mythical nuclear weapons for decades now. And the Israelis have been obsessing about Iran's nuclear capabilities, when in fact, many years ago, the supreme leader issued a fatwa declaring that nuclear weapons were evil and illegal, and they would never make them. Now, as far as I'm aware, that fatwa has never been overturned, updated, or changed in any way. And while the rest of Western intelligence is pouring cold water on Iran's nuclear ambitions, Israel has constantly gone on and on about nuclear weapons, very much in the same way as Tony Blair blinded us all with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which led to the war in 2003 with America and Britain illegally invading Iraq. So Israel has been trying to whip us all into a state of fear and frenzy, when in fact, the elephant in the living room is the fact that Israel has up to 400 nuclear warheads in its country. And every accusation these days from Israel is beginning to sound like a confession. So I think it's Israel that is obsessing over nuclear weapons, and which has nothing to do with Iran's nuclear program.
Thank you indeed, Dr. Yvonne. Let me turn now to Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi. So here it is. What we all feared is now taking place. The US is directly involved after those strikes to the nuclear facilities. What are your thoughts on this, Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi?
Actually, it's the dream of the colonial states prime minister comes true. And he was pushing for this for decades, like it was said by the previous speakers. And this is what he was looking for, and he got what he wanted for a decade. From actually all the rhetoric that he was pushing, actually he tried under the Obama administration, then under the first term administration of current President Mr. Donald Trump, and later with the previous administration, Joe Biden, and now with the second term of President Donald Trump. Actually, he did cave in to all his demands. Meanwhile, the I would call it the ruse doctrine of President Donald Trump, that he was actually lying to the Iranians and to the leaders in the region by going with that so pragmatism of business mindset, and he portrayed himself as a dove, but it turned out to be hawkish, like the one who, the other current who is dominating his or shaping his foreign policy in the Middle East, the neocons. And this is why actually the Iranians, they got fool twice. Actually, you fool me once, it's shame on you. Fool me twice, it's shame on me. And this is what happened to the Iranians. So now the prime minister of the colonial state, he did, in fact, drag the U.S. into this, what he was looking for, to clash, make the clash between the U.S. and the Iranians. And this is, by the way, it's the first time that took place since 1979. And there were some wars here and there, but it was kind of shadow wars between the U.S. and the Iranians, whether on the Syrian terrain or in Iraq, but this time it's direct. And the ultimate goal of the prime minister of the colonial state, it's obvious now. It's not about the Iranian nuclear program. It is now about regime change. And this is what actually and the consequences will be unknown. So, and now to quote another master of the Iraq war, Donald Rumsfeld, when he was speaking about the unknown knows.
Mm-hmm. And just since you brought Donald Trump up, I would like to share with you and dear audiences what he said lately. Trump warned Iran of more strikes if Tehran does not return to what he termed the peace table, stressing that any retaliation against the US would be met with a much stronger response.
Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Back to you, Dr. Tahir Ahmad. Did the US fall into Israel's strategy trap, like Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi was hinting, and as many others suggest? What do you think?
Yes, I believe that the US got into the trap. The reason is that the US had been conducting treaties like from $13 trillion treaties with the Arab world, and it was equally engaging with the Iran on the nuclear issue and bringing it to the mainstream. Whereas for Israel was the question that bringing Iran into the mainstream would result into loss of its facts and support of the US. So when you have one major power on your side and you are the sole nuclear power in the Middle East, then there can be no challenge. So the reason is that Netanyahu wants to stay in power by creating more threats abroad and wielding more power at home, while sabotaging efforts that include other nations as a balancing to Israel. So, and this, why we call that a trap, is that because there is no strategic stint of engaging in this war, as Iran had been at the enrichment level at the 60%, which means that they cannot build a bomb immediately. There are reports from the National Intelligence Director of the US that they were not having bomb or not building bomb. And secondly, the IAEA directors also stated that there was no such thing in the offing they could make the US or Israel bomb Iran or attack Iran. So the question is something else, which appears that this was not actually the Iran's ability to build a bomb. It was not the Iran's capacity, that it was on the verge of making a bomb. It was something else. And it appears that when the US is engaging in agreement with Iran, that will give a legitimacy to a state which can balance out Israel only. And this effort was going to happen just days after the Israel started striking Iran. So what was Iran doing? It was engaging with the European Union and with other nations just to put pressure upon them to persuade or pressurize Israel to come to abandon or to cease attacks on its territory. But date was did not materialize, whether it was the Israeli lobby in the US or their influence in the EU. So, in a way, in a nutshell, we see that no power was engaged or was not ready to come to this war. Secondly, the strategic significance and the geoeconomic significance of Iran's influence in this region would sit ripple across the region by disturbing trade, by creating instability across the region. If Iran shifts the locus of the conflict to other states, so it has the ability to induce instability in other regions. And as we know, that US bases are everywhere there. So if you brought US on your side against Iran, and Iran has the ability to inflict at least damage, which will be unacceptable or which will create havoc with world trade. So on that occasion, on that date will be the point which suits Netanyahu's strategy, just to create a situation where the US or major power, a spectacular major influencer in the world politics, will be on its side.
Thank you indeed. And Dr. Ivan Ridley, if we put ourselves into Iran's shoes and Iranian people's shoes, how can we still talk about a peaceful settlement after those B-2 strike there?
Well, it's quite clear that President Trump knows very little about international diplomacy. He might know a bit about property and trade deals, business, but you can't bomb a country and then say, right, let's start talking peace. And, you know, America is next year, it'll be 250 years old. And that's very, very young for a country. Iran has a history stretching back 6,000 years. And seeing the two nations together is a bit like seeing a child playing tiddlywinks with a chess master. I think that when Trump said that this was a really successful mission, it reminded me of the statement made by George W. Bush a few weeks into the Iraq war, in which he said, after 6 weeks, mission accomplished. And of course, it wasn't. And the body bags started coming back to America, and the American people started to ask questions about Iraq and the wisdom of the war there. And I think that America is back on the same trajectory, having been pushed and goaded by Israel into bombing Iran. And, you know, we should remember that it was Netanyahu, yet again, who was pushing and goading America to invade Iraq. And he kept saying, if we can get rid of Iraq, if we can get rid of Saddam, then, you know, the Middle East will be so much more peaceful. But once Iraq went, he then went after other countries. And since then, we've seen Syria destabilized, regime change there, and Lebanon destroyed. Israel is not a nation of peace, and America is foolish to allow itself to be used like this. It's, lacking in diplomacy. And I think that there is far worse to come in the world. And this is why the global south is looking on in despair, and the allies, the Western allies of America, are equally concerned.
Thank you indeed. And just speaking of the pretext again, I would like to go back to the narrative that we are receiving from the United States. And here I share the latest updates, where U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed on Sunday that the strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities were a great success, emphasizing the destruction of Iran's nuclear program. Speaking at a Pentagon press conference, Hegseth stated that the operation was carried out by B-2 strategic bombers, which entered the airspace, dropped their bombs, and exited without being detected.
And are fully postured to respond to any.
Last night, on President Trump's orders, U.S. Central Command conducted a precision strike in the middle of the night against 3 nuclear facilities in Iran: Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, in order to destroy or severely degrade Iran's nuclear program. And as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs will demonstrate, it was an incredible and overwhelming success. The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program. But it's worth noting the operation did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people.
In the same context, and on his part, U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Dan Kane confirmed that the operation was secret, with only a few officials in Washington aware of it.
Fighters did not fly, and it appears that Iran's surface-to-air missile systems did not see us. Throughout the mission, we retained the element of surprise. Linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver required.
In the same context, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance confirmed on Sunday that the United States succeeded in disrupting Iran's nuclear program, adding in an interview with NBC that the strike significantly limited Iran's ability to develop a nuclear bomb.
We did not attack any civilian targets. We didn't even attack military targets outside of the 3 nuclear weapons facilities that we thought were important to accomplish our goal of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi, was Iran really close to making a bomb, or was that narrative engineered?
Actually, this fits the narrative of the colonial state prime minister and the neocons in Washington, D.C., and how also the prime minister of the colonial state influence is huge on the U.S. Politicians and notably the decision makers. So this time it looks like Iraq all over again, but in a different context, because in 2002, 2003, America had the 9/11 in 2001, and which was quote unquote, a valid argument to go and destroy or what then the American president, George W. Bush, was shaping the world between good and evils. But this time it's socially we are in a different context. Don't forget, the ongoing carnage that is taking place in Gaza, it's still going on. And the Zionist state, it is a colonial and apartheid state. And his atrocities that are committed day in and day out in Gaza Strip, and the annexation process that is taking place in the West Bank and so on in Al-Quds Sharif. So And also there is this kind of mobility and international awakening of the youth and particularly the elite, I mean the students who are again taking the street and speaking out about those atrocities that are taking place on the Palestinian people. So the U.S. president, as your distinguished guest said, has zero experience and knowledge on foreign policy. And he has that, I would say, character of entertainer-in-chief. And he thinks that politics and geopolitics is just a banal entertainment business. No, it is a serious business, and especially the region. Now, speaking about the Iranians are the people, are very, very proud people, like any people in the region. But particularly the Iranians, they never forget what happened to them 72 years ago or 73 years ago with the coup. Well, now, for the Iranians, sure, there are about 3 generations, and now the large majority of the Iranians, were born after the 1998. That's fine. But they are smart people. They know their history and they know about democracy, particularly when it is imposed by the West. This hypocrite West who tries, he sold us, we, the Easterners, the same, actually, these cheap products about talking about human rights, democracy, and so on. And we see what is happening again today at this moment in Palestine. So the Iranian people are behind their leaders. Sure, there are some differences. There is a huge or large opposition that oppose the regime in Tehran. But when it comes to national unity, national integrity, and what is there is something, it's striking when you hear these American leaders speaking about, we just sent some B-52 and B-2 on those nuclear facilities, but we didn't want to touch the people. Well, so again, to sum up this, I don't think the Iranians will let this happen to them, and they will fight. And the surprise, I'm speaking about the element of surprise, this is why we don't know what's going to happen. Especially the Iranian leaders now, they are taking this seriously, what happened last night. It is, of course, serious. They were hit seriously. So now the Iranians, they are in this equation between the capitulation of or surrender and conditional surrender imposed by U.S. president, and they don't want to commit political suicide because they know, if this happens, the entire region will, will go to chaos and will be an apocalyptic scenario. And the Iranians, they don't want to see this because particularly this time, at this moment, they succeed to some extent to rally the entire region behind them, particularly the people. And what they did also, they demystified what some Arab leaders were selling to their peoples about this, quote unquote, the Shia crescent. Well, this Shia crescent today is a full moon in the region.
Thank you indeed. And Dr. Yvonne Ridley, how much damage did the U.S. operation actually cause, and can this damage be repaired whatsoever?
Well, it's not an area of my expertise, but apparently they, after the bombings of the 3 sites, they were checked for radiation leaks, because one would imagine if you obliterate a facility where uranium is being enriched, then there would be signs of radioactive leaks, and there hasn't been. So you have to wonder, did they actually damage the uranium enrichment side of things, or was the damage cosmetic? The other thing is, they said, there was an element of surprise. Well, this is absolute nonsense, because according to the Iranians, they anticipated these attacks, and they had already removed the uranium enrichment facilities from the 3 plants to another location. So damage, I don't think so. You have to remember that Iran and Iraq went through a horrific 8-year war. And that was a terrible experience for the Iranians. They will have learned a lot from that brutal encounter. More than 1 million lives were lost. They won't want to repeat that again. And of course, they've had over 30 years to prepare for what happened last night, because, Netanyahu has been snapping at their heels for years, saying they're making a bomb, and whipping America into a state of frenzy. So I don't believe that the attack last night was as devastating as the Americans would like to think. And as I say, the Iranians are they've been around for years, and they the last thing that they wanted was to go to war. But Iran isn't Iraq. Iran is armed, it is dangerous, its forces are disciplined, and they have been rehearsing and practicing and anticipating this for years. So, they've already overcome the Iron Dome defense system, which was the pride of Israel, worth millions on the arms market. And, last night they sent off a 4th generation missile, which had multiple warheads and had the effect of 80 missiles hurtling towards Israel. So I think that everyone, certainly in Tel Aviv and Washington, has seriously underestimated the capacity and capabilities of the Iranian regime.
And speaking of the Iranian regime, let's just try to weigh in the options Iran has now. Is it revenge or restraint? Well, we'll see during the discussion that we will have. But I would like to pinpoint the latest update with the reaction. The Iranian foreign minister stressed that the U.S. strikes on Iran were heinous, warning that they would have lasting repercussions after the United States and the Zionist entity had, as he put it, blown up diplomacy.
We were in the middle of diplomacy. We were in the middle of talks with the United States when Israelis blew it up. And again, we were in the middle of talks and negotiation with Europeans, happened only 2 days ago in Geneva, when this time Americans decided to blow it up. So we were in diplomacy, but we were attacked. Of course, the door for diplomacy should be always keep open, but this is not the case right now. My country has been under attack, under aggression, and we have to respond based on our legitimate right of self-defense.
So as we had Dr. Tahir Ahmad, is Iran likely to respond as we just had in kind or maybe calibrate its strikes? How do you see it? Would you agree with Abdurrahman Tumi saying that the regime or Iran in general will respond?
Yes, it's most likely Iran will respond as there is nothing left for them to negotiate. When you go into post-conflict negotiation or to de-escalation, you need a one-touch point. So here Iran has been attacked and its three facilities, as the US claims, have been destroyed. So it is left for negotiation as the point of a conflict has been these nuclear plants. So what is left within Iran for negotiation? It has been attacked. Its leadership has been assassinated. So what Iran will try to do is to get leverage, and that leverage came somehow creating some trouble for the US. And they may stop or disrupt the flow of oil trade and LNG trade in the Strait of Hormuz. They can attack the US bases in the Middle East, and they can directly engage with Israel as they have been doing successfully by firing ballistic missiles on its territory. So these are the three major targets which could be the targets of Iran in retaliation. If we wage the negotiation, so it is Iran will not trust even the US and the EU. That is, both were engaged in talks, and there was an element of deception to this diplomacy. So the credibility of diplomacy has been shattered by this attack. So there is less likelihood of Iran trusting the US and EU. And if you look at the statements coming from the EU Foreign Affairs head, this is aggressive statement saying Iran shall not have nuclear weapons. Also, if you look at that, they were actually hoping or calling for negotiations. If you British Prime Minister, his statements, he said that we are not part of the we were we knew the sides and Iran nuclear weapons, or we should not have nuclear weapons. So if you look at these statements, they are actually impliedly supporting the nuclear stance and the action taken by the US. So there is less likelihood of Iran engaging with these powers, and what for they would go. So obviously, the big strategy, or for me, Iran would be calibrating and calculating is to get something in hand that is pushing Israel or getting something into hand so that they could negotiate. But I told you earlier, if Iran had increased the level of enrichment of uranium to 60%, which was being used as leverage in negotiations with the P5 plus one nations while negotiating on nuclear weapons, nuclear program. So it was not actually nearer to building a bomb. And so that negotiation leverage has been taken away from Iran. And secondly, it is actually a humiliation or a national humiliation for Iran. It will be just to surrender or succumb to the US pressure. So they have nothing to lose to escalate right now. But certainly, if we draw a comparison of capabilities between the US and Iran, so the US can inflict considerable damage upon Iran. The stoppage of trade and then destabilizing region or shifting the locus of the conflict, spreading to the region, this will create havoc. For even its effect will be felt across the globe, and Iran has the ability in this region to do it. So, from a point of Iran has been actually pushed to the war, and and it is has gone to the point of no return. So obviously, it is wedging its options, how to go and who will actually get it to bring it to negotiation table. Secondly, the negotiations will depend on what? Its nuclear program. Will Iran agree after these attacks? Because the IAEA safeguard, the IAEA inspectors have been on ground and they have been inspecting and they have access to these nuclear facilities. So once the IAEA have access and been inspecting such facilities, so then it cannot be attacked. So if those have been attacked, so it is actually setting a blow to the non-proliferation norms. So how Iran will trust this organization? And then if you look at another comparison, that non-proliferation or engaging in nuclear non-proliferation will result into security. This will actually encourage more rhetoric, more steps toward nuclearization in this region. And no one would believe that if you have nuclear bomb, you cannot be bombed. If you possess nuclear bomb, so you cannot be bombed. But this may incite Iranian revolutionary RG to move to become more autocratic and more become more enthusiastic about acquiring nuclear facilities. So you can destroy facilities. You cannot destroy the knowledge, and that knowledge is being there. And you cannot have full knowledge of actually the enemies, where they are hiding the enrichment material, where they are being placed, whether they are dispersed, whether the US and Israel had complete information, absolute information about the nuclear programs, or there are some lapses. So if you look at the recent ballistic missile capability of Iran, and which is coming as a surprise and penetrating the Iron Dome capability of Israel, so certainly there is lack of information in the US. And there is also biasness towards information in the US leadership, as the US president was not accepted those information, which was contradicting his designs, as the national security director stated that Iran was not building a bomb. So this is a scenario that left Iran with no option
We will get
to go for
dive a little
negotiation. Rather,
deeper
they
on
will
the
go for
future
leverage.
scenarios. Thank you, Dr. Tahir Ahmed. But let me include here Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi. You have been listening to the analysis of Tahir Ahmed, and he kind of eliminated any options for going back to peace. And let's say we are in the war. Tehran is actually in an open war with the US and the Zionist entity. But how does Tehran avoid triggering even wider war with the US in the Middle East? Or that ship has indeed sailed, just like Dr. Tahir Ahmed was saying?
Actually, it's going to be very, very hard to see a war between the US and Iran. I mean, for many reasons. And there is this American superiority and so on. But what Iran has actually has two wild cards. It's the oil card that is on the Hormuz Straits, and also all the Iranians' allies in the region, now that the Americans and the colonial states prime minister think that are weakened, and they are now weak, and they cannot cause any severe damage to the U.S. interests and national security. I will argue to the contrary, because the Houthis, Ansarullah, and the Hezbollah, adding other resistance who are still in Syria, and also Hashd al-Shabi and other groups, and can go beyond that with all those Afghanis groups who are gathered and considered as serious elements in this equation of war. And not to mention the Iranians' capability, missile capability to strike on the U.S. bases and in the region. It's kind of a tricky scenario because, as I said, the context now is in favor of detente between Iran and its neighbors, and particularly in light of the rapprochement that was made 2 years ago with Saudi Arabia, that China played a major role and a credible broker to bring those two pivotal states in the region together. So, but now, as far as the negotiations process goes, I mean, it is irrelevant right now because on one hand, the Americans are asking the Iranians to come in and actually negotiate, but it's not negotiation or discussion. It's all about capitulation. So, and this will never happen. The Iranians, they will never do that. I mean, for just simple reason, as I stated earlier, it's because of national pride, and it is legitimate. On the other hand, there is an important element also is the trust, and now the Iranians don't trust anyone, those Westerners who have been lying to them. I mean, whether are the Americans or the Europeans. I mean, those Europeans who have been who met with them just 2 days ago, and on just the next night, I mean, the Iranians got hit by surprise factor, and they were bombed. So right now, the Iranians are, as I said, in very, very difficult moments about how to find a way to break through, first of all, react, to retaliate to the Americans on one hand, and keep pushing and hitting hard the colonial states and hitting him in deep, whereas changes the entire theory or equation of deterrence in which the colonial state has actually taken this equation in light of the October 7, 2023 Al-Aqsa flood operation. Now, for the colonial state doctrine, it's no longer about deterrence, but it's about destruction. And this is why the colonial state, the prime minister and whoever they are, and his entourage, in their strategic thinking on the neighbors and extra neighbors, what they call it, the direct threat or the existential threat. I mean, going first from the entire peripheric, and here goes back to the Iranians' allies, who are not non-state actors, and now they are going to the center, meaning by that Iran. So it's going to be very, very, again, very difficult to see how these scenarios will play out. But there are also another element in this equation: the neighboring countries, the leaders of the neighboring countries, who are seriously nervous.
And speaking of the neighboring countries, thank you so much for pointing to that point. I just would like to give the updates regarding the neighboring countries, since you mentioned them, Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi. So Saudi Arabia expressed deep concern on Sunday over the rapidly escalating developments in Iran, describing the US strikes on Iranian territory as a violation of Tehran's sovereignty. Riyadh called for maximum restraint and de-escalation, warning that the worsening situation at such a critical time threatens the region's security and stability. Meanwhile, Qatar's foreign ministry expressed regret over the deterioration of the situation following the bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities, warning that the dangerous tensions unfolding in the region could lead to catastrophic consequences on both the regional and international levels. Oman's foreign ministry, for its part, condemned the U.S. aggression on Iran, labeling it illegal and warning against the expansion of war across the Middle East. In a statement on Sunday, the ministry described the U.S. attack as a serious violation of international law, noting that the United Nations Charter prohibits the use of force and the violation of national sovereignty. It also cited the Geneva Conventions, which prohibit targeting nuclear facilities due to the risks of contamination and radiation. Let me get back to you, Dr. Yvonne Ridley. What do you think? Will Hezbollah or the Houthis escalate the situation, joining in this war? Will they execute their threats, which they, of course, revealed before the U.S. executed this operation?
Well, we know that Hezbollah has been degraded in recent weeks and months by Israeli action, and the loss of their leader, Nasrallah, cannot be underestimated. So I'm not sure that we're going to see a great deal from Hezbollah just yet. The Houthis are incredibly resourceful and fearless, and I think that they may well be emboldened to attack more ships in the Red Sea as they had before. But diplomatically, Iran might seem to be caught between a rock and a hard place. But, you know, I remember back in the situation of the US embassy siege in Tehran in November 1979, there was a country that did play a key role in the Iran-US hostage crisis, and that was Algeria. And I'm wondering, maybe because Algeria was seen as a trusted neutral mediator between Iran and the United States, whether or not Algiers could be called back into diplomatic action again. I don't know if anyone's thought of that yet, but when the bilateral talks had reached a deadlock between Iran and the US, it was Algeria that actually came and played a very crucial role in negotiating the hostage releases. So you mentioned before about Saudi, Oman, Qatar, you know, all the Gulf states, all the big oil producers. Well, of course, they've all got heavily vested interests in seeing a de-escalation. And so has Algeria as an oil producer as well, because the one card that Iran has not played yet is in the Straits of Hormuz, which is the global pressure point. And if they decide, which they've never done before, but if they decide to block the Straits of Hormuz, then oil prices could really rocket. At the moment, they're about $74 a barrel. But if the Straits of Hormuz is blocked, which accounts for a movement of at least 20% of oil production, if that is blocked, then oil prices will rocket past the $100 a barrel mark, possibly up to $200 a barrel. And of course, this is why the countries that you mentioned before are all calling for de-escalation. But as I say, the one country that has been a trusted intermediary in the past has been Algeria. So we might yet see Algeria playing yet again a key role in this volatile part of the world.
And since you brought up Algeria into this discussion, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, let's just hear about its position regarding what's happening. Algeria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Ammar Benjama, warned of a dangerous escalation unfolding in the Middle East, stating the continuation of this situation threatens both regional and international peace and security. Speaking at an emergency session, Ambassador Ammar Benjama voiced deep alarm over the American strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, cautioning that the region is teetering on the edge of catastrophe.
The world, and especially the Middle East, cannot endure another war. Unfortunately, events in the region are accelerating in an alarming pace, pushing the Middle East dangerously close to an apocalyptic scenario. At a time when the international community was united, in seeking ways to ease tensions, the situation has deteriorated sharply yesterday and further exacerbated by American strikes targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. Algeria expresses its deep concern and regret over this grave development, which significantly worsens the security and exposes the entire region to unprecedented risks with potentially uncontainable consequences.
And on the same occasion, Algeria renewed its call for de-escalation, urging all parties to commit to dialogue. At the UN, Ambassador Ammar Benjama stressed the need for an immediate ceasefire and a return to negotiations to resolve the Iranian nuclear crisis peacefully.
Algeria reiterates again its firm call for an immediate ceasefire, a return to the negotiating table, and a sincere commitment by all concerned parties to finding a peaceful and negotiated solution to the Iranian nuclear issue.
Still with diplomacy, and earlier, Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf held a series of high-level meetings in Istanbul on the sidelines of the OIC Foreign Ministers Summit, focused on the ongoing Zionist attacks on Iran and their impact on regional stability. In talks with his Iranian counterpart, Mr. Attaf reaffirmed Algeria's support for peaceful diplomatic solutions and its commitment as a UN Security Council member to upholding international law. Meetings with the Egyptian and Jordanian foreign ministers stressed the need for Arab-Islamic coordination to de-escalate tensions and revive nuclear diplomacy. Attaf also discussed regional developments with his Azerbaijani counterpart, pledging to boost bilateral ties and economic cooperation amid rising tensions in Iran's neighborhood. And in response to recent developments as well, Algeria expressed deep concern and regret over the dangerous escalation of the Zionist aggression against Iran, particularly the U.S. bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities. The Algerian Foreign Ministry warned of unprecedented and unpredictable risks in the region and called for a return to the peaceful political path based on international law and the UN Charter. It also stressed the urgent need for a ceasefire, a return to negotiations, and sincere efforts to reach a peaceful resolution to the Iranian nuclear issue.
Amid international consensus to reduce regional tensions, the recent Zionist aggression against Iran, marked by the US bombing of nuclear sites, has escalated risks and worsened the situation. Algeria deeply regrets this dangerous escalation and urges all parties to learn from the region's history, where military solutions have never resolved conflicts. The global agreement emphasizes the need for a ceasefire, renewed negotiations, and sincere efforts toward a peaceful resolution of the Iranian nuclear issue. The priority must be to follow a peaceful political path grounded in international law and the UN Charter to prevent further tension and tragedy.
Let me get back to you, Dr. Tahir Ahmed. In light of what is happening and all this escalation, do you think the Gulf states are really able to stay out of the crossfire?
So far as I think, the Gulf states have very complicated relationship, both with Iran and Israel, and what I assess strategically, they won't like any of these states to stand out as a powerful entity in the region. They won't like Israel to become a police state of the region. At the same time, they won't like Iran to have nuclear weapons. So this sort, while they also maintain good relationship with the US hosting their bases, and also they have trade relations with the outer world. So going either side would invite aggression or the wrath of another side. So this is something like the Gulf states cannot take sides. They will remain neutral. They would show solidarity while they could not be able to condemn, as they cannot risk their interest. So as far as whether they can stand out of the conflict or they can get themselves aloof from the impacts of the conflict, that is in the hands of Iran and the losing partner of the region, any state, whether it is Israel or Iran. If they are losing, they will shift the locus from their own territory to the region and making it as a regional war and denying the objectives of the war from the adversaries or from the dominant states. And this will increase the stakes of the war higher and higher for the attacker. So, and this is the time, and this is strategically speaking, when two states go to escalation ladder. So there are levels of ladder. So the US has crossed the ladder from Israel attacks to the US direct bombing, involvement in the war and directly bombing the nuclear sites of Iran. So this has increased the escalation ladder. So what is left with Iran? They retaliated with ballistic missiles, and then they were showing their capability, like testing one missile after another. Now they can have another leverage. That is the Strait of Hormuz and activating proxies, in which Houthis may be more a formidable force. And they can affect Bab al-Mandab. And in the same way, Iran can directly hit Strait of Hormuz. So eventually they will affect the Gulf states as well. So this is a situation in which the Gulf states can show only solidarity while they will raise calls for negotiation and de-escalation. They have no other option left. And the reason is that, and at the same time, they won't want none of the states, whether it is Iran or Israel, they won't like one state to be a policing state. Rather, they would like both the states as a balancer. So in a way, the balance when two states, Iran and Israel, are balancing each other, this will give a free ride, a peaceful way for negotiating with the outer world for trade and increasing their enhancing their soft power, economic power. So, and there is one thing with the Arab states or the Gulf states, which they are lacking, is they have not been able to effectively utilize their soft power as a means of bargain or bringing U.S. policies in their favor, or at least to the favor of peace. So, in all the Muslims, whether it is other non-Arab states, they have the same problem. And even allies of the Iran, such as China, they have huge trade coming from the Gulf states. So, if they encourage Iran to go for retaliation and increase the conflict, so whether they will be able to afford the cost or not. So it is in the hands of Iran, I think, and they will try, they will pressurize the world to get something for the negotiating table. And we are hearing news that the pattern in chief of Iran in this conflict has been Russia. So in consultation with Russia, after consultation with Russia, this thing may happen. And whether the Russia will see another ally dying down in the Middle East, whether they are able, whether they will be able to afford or not. So, and there is the question of credibility. The final point is...
We will get to the question of credibility, but this is breaking news that we received just in. We have here Occupation Army or the Front Command saying alerts will be activated in central occupied territories after missile launches from Iran. And it says as well that they have detected missile launches from Iran and air defenses are working to intercept them. Of course, we will get more details on this with footage as well. And just to continue our debate, let me turn to Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi now. And as you heard Dr. Ahmed Tahir speaking, that the Arab countries have not really been exercising their soft power to maybe weigh in this game of war. And Dr. Yvonne Ridley also mentioned or pinpoint a diplomatic crisis that happened back in the years where Algeria played a crucial role. Although we have seen France, Spain, Russia and India all warning of the escalation and saying let's de-escalate and so on. But do you see any credible bloc capable of mediating an immediate ceasefire? Would you agree with Dr. Yvonne Ridley that Algeria is the best candidate for such a thing? Or can the OIC, the Arab League or African Union play a more active role here, or they are sidelined in this crisis?
Actually, of course, I put Algeria on top, to lead according to its glory history in terms of diplomacy. And Algeria's peace diplomacy and actually always its objectives, aims for peace and security and in fact, stability and prosperity, whether on its geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape or in the Middle East and on international or on world stage. But right now, at this moment, it's very, very difficult not to find a credible mediator. But the question is on the other side, because actually President Donald Trump and the colonial state prime minister don't believe in diplomacy. When you see President Donald Trump actually speaking about his peace through strength, this again, it goes with his contradictory doctrine. On the other side, when you see the prime minister of the colonial state, he doesn't believe in peace. Actually, even when he speaks about the security, he focuses only on the security of his people on one hand, and also when he and actually himself and President Donald Trump, when both speak about those quote unquote normalization. By the way, normalization for me and for many others, it means capitulation. So they want the people in the leaders in the region, the Arabs and non-Arabs in the region, to come to this negotiation table, to sign a Versailles treaty. And also, just we saw it, and we saw the statement of the Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister, Mr. Araghchi, when he said, while we were speaking and discussing some issue to find a solution to break through, the negotiation table was imploded. So, and this sabotage that was made by the colonial state prime minister. Now, as far as the Arab leaders in the region, whether in Near East or in the Gulf countries, now they are in historic moments. These, things are shaping their geopolitics and geoeconomic slants. We are not as I said, in the context of the 80s and the 90s, and even in the post-Iraq war, U.S. invasion on Iraq in 2003. So we are in a new phase, and this is why, they have to find and to think strategically and to review all their strategic,
But it seems that the occupation media is reporting, Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi, the occupation media, Hebrew media, is reporting that sirens are wailing and heard in the center of occupied Palestine after Iran missiles launched toward occupied Palestine were launched, and after Iran launched many drones at the same time. Iranian news agency is also saying that there is a launch of massive missile attack against the Zionist entity, and we can see live footage right here portraying the missiles being fired toward the central occupied Palestine. Back to you, Dr. Yvonne Ridley. Of course, we've been listening to the analysis of Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi as well as Tahir Ahmed, and you pointed out to the fact that Algeria could play a major role in resolving such crises. But how do you interpret, for example, India's and Turkey's balanced language calling for de-escalation? Do you think they are perhaps hedging or genuinely pursuing neutrality?
Well, of course, they would want the world to see them as being neutral, but we know that India has a very close relationship with Israel, and I don't think they would be viewed as an honest broker. I think that the Iranians would be very suspicious of their motivations. And Turkey has always been seen as a regional power, and I think that President Erdogan likes to see himself as a sort of emir for the Muslim world, and someone who could also act as a peace broker, but Israel would not trust him. So it is quite difficult. The thing that is in Algeria's favor is that it is wholly independent. You know, last year it decided not to join the BRICS group, which would have brought it in with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. and of course, Egypt, Iran, and the UAE and Saudi and Ethiopia have all expressed an interest in joining BRICS. So had Algeria been part of BRICS, then it would have been viewed with suspicion or having a vested interest by Israel. So it is possible, I think, that Algeria could be seen as an honest broker, as the diplomatic power that could bring the two sides together. These are very interesting times, and Algeria is often overlooked as the Gulf states vie for soft power and to be the voice of reason in the region. But I don't see, there's no reason why Algeria couldn't move forward. China is also an interesting situation. It's, quite the antithesis to the USA. While the USA has been at war every year for the last 40, 50 years, bombing, invading, and attacking other countries, China has spent that time laying tracks for the future, while America has been digging graves. China has built cities, schools, trains, and have been laying foundations, for the future. Mm-hmm. So China is very interesting, and they would also have an input. But the strength of China, the strength of Algeria, is that both countries have a history going back thousands of years, but they also know the pain of futile wars and conflicts. I mentioned before about Iran and Iraq had lost 1 million people in that 8-year war. And of course, nobody knows the pain more of martyrdom than Algeria. Mm-hmm. So I think that, if I wanted an honest broker with no history or background, and somebody that both sides could trust, I would put my money on Algeria.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed, Dr. Yvonne Ridley. But a question that is perhaps linked to this, speaking of the public and how the Algerians suffered and everything. Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi, this question goes like this. What role is public diplomacy playing here? Can Iran, for example, capitalize on international sympathy after being struck first?
Actually, right now, yes, it is. And actually, it's a favorable element for the Iranians. And this comes in light of the atrocities and the carnage that is taking place in occupied Palestine, on the Palestinian people. So, and also the Iranians, they have a good experience dealing with public diplomacy. And even though, they're actually, when we speak about the regime, actually they have this kind of bad image that is presented and, like, to some point, tarnished by the biased media, pro-Zionist media in the West. And again, those media who speak about human rights and women's rights and so on. But while it comes to the Palestinians, I mean, they don't speak a word about it. So, and this is why this double standard rhetoric makes the Iranians right now, or the case of the Iranians right now is very solid to challenge their leaders, or I mean, those leaders in the West in particular. And what was actually stunning, what happened just 2 days or 3 days ago, I believe in the G7 summit, coming from the statement, and I'm trying to paraphrase that, comes from the German chancellor when he said the Zionist state is doing our dirty work in the region. So these actually, this kind of statements, I mean, enhanced the position of the Iranians. And beyond that, I mean, these acts, I mean, whether the aggression of the Zionist army on the Iranians and last night U.S. bombardment, it's an illegal act.
Mm-hmm. And back to you, Dr. Ahmed Tahir. There are fears of balkanization of Iran. How realistic are these fears, and who benefits from a weakened Iranian state?
There were rumors that the US may go for a regime change. But if you, realistically speaking, the regime of Iran, particularly after the US bombing and the Israeli attacks, has transformed into ideological as well as nationalistic state. The regime has the Persian nationalism and personal civilizational nationalism, plus the regime ideological strength. It has increased tremendously. As we see, people came out on the Friday prayers in support of the regime. So there is less likelihood of a regime crumbling in Iran. But if that happens, this will affect Turkey, Syria, Iraq, as there is the Kurdistan ethnicity, and that can. Then there is the Iranian Azerbaijan, and then we see the Khuzestan, the Ahwaz area. The people, the Arab Khuzestan. There's Arabs are there, so they can be incited. Then there is Sistan, Balochistan. So there are so many. But if you look at this, such kind of operation will require ground operation. But if you look at the geography and topography of Iran, we see it is being surrounded by mountainous ranges. So from the west, right from the Arabian Persian Gulf to the north until Afghanistan. So there is no such thing as ground access to the Iranian territory. It is guarded by mountainous region. So it is very tough. And that has been experienced and witnessed by history when during Iran-Iraq war, Iraq was unable to capture territorially areas of Iran, although it had area superiority. And this was because of that mountainous region.
Point
Only
clear,
some
Dr.
parts
Ahmed.
nearer to the mountains were captured. So if you look at that parameter, so it is a fantasy actually to bring a change and bring balkanization.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Tahir. I just would like to give a final word to Dr. Yvonne Ridley before we wrap up. Dr. Ridley, very briefly, if diplomacy returns, what format should it take? Bilateral, US-Iran talks, EU brokered summit, or a full UN-led process?
It would be good to see a full UN contact. The UN has been sidelined recently, and we need to see a strong, worthy UN that is capable of delivering just solutions. And, you know, once we get unity in the UN, we will have a more peaceful world, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you indeed, Dr. Yvonne Ridley. And I would like just to remind our dear viewers of what's happening live on the ground right now. Occupation media is reporting that sirens are wailing in the center of occupied Palestine, to be precise, after Iran missiles were launched toward occupied Palestine. Also, we have Iranian news agency saying a launch of missile attack against the Zionist entity was initiated. And at the end, on a war that started in whispers, has become a global shout. Tonight's debate showed us that the stakes are high, not just for Tehran or Tel Aviv, but for all of us. In a time of peril, let us not forget the power of diplomacy and the cost of silence. Thank you to all my guests, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, Dr. Abdurrahman Tumi, and Dr. Tahir Ahmed for all your insights. This was All 24 News special coverage. I'm Karim Fazakri. Good night.